Hello everybody, Andrew here for the Niagara Christian Gaming Club. Today I'd like to introduce my new tutorial video series for NCGC.ca. The goal of this project is to create brief video tutorials about different games so that when people come down for meetups they have a good idea on how a game works and it'll be easier for them to jump into one. So I thought it'd be fitting to start my first video with the game that started me on hobby gaming, Magic the Gathering. Now, Magic the Gathering is a trading card game that's produced by Wizards of the Coast and was originally made by Richard Garfield back in 1993. So over the last 20 years, there's been over 13,000 different Magic cards created. So, let's take a look at how the game works.
You're watching an NCGC tutorial video. In Magic the Gathering, you play as a Planeswalker, a spell-slinging wizard that can jump between worlds and defeat evil, or if you are so inclined, you may cause it. Your deck of cards in Magic represents the different spells you know, the creatures you can summon to fight for you, as well as the resources you need to cast them. These cards are cast by using the power of mana. Mana is produced from land cards and comes in 5 different colors. White mana is produced by planes and represents law and order. A white mage tends to summon a coordinated army of soldiers to defeat his foes. Blue mana is produced by islands and runs on trickery and manipulation. A blue mage likes to make the perfect setup before he strikes, and always make sure he's in control of his situation. Black mana is produced by swamps. Black magic is all about death and disease and winning at all costs, whether that be by sacrificing your friends or raising a horde of zombies from the dead to overrun your opponents. Red mana is made by mountains, and as a red mage you live by the throw fireballs first, ask questions later policy. And you have pet dragons. And last but not least is green magic. Green mages have the biggest creatures to be their allies, and green mana represents life and growth. Okay, let's take a look at a standard creature card. This is the Hollow-Hinged Beast. So this is the mana cost for the card. In order to play this card, you need to be able to produce 5 mana. 3 of it can be any color, but 2 of it has to be green. Right here is where you find the type and subtype of this card. So this is a creature card, and it has the beast type. This is the text box where you can find all the keywords of a card and any abilities that it has. This is also where a lot of cards have a flavor text. The flavor text on the Hollow-Hinged Beast is, "In a world of monsters, it's the stuff of nightmares." Far more terrifying than it actually is. And here on the bottom right corner is the power and toughness of a creature. If the toughness ever reaches 0 of a creature, it becomes destroyed. So there are 7 different types of cards in Magic. There are land cards, creature cards, sorceries, instants, enchantments, artifacts, and planeswalkers. Land cards are generally used to produce mana. Each turn, a player is allowed to play 1 land card, and they may tap it to gain 1 mana of the corresponding color. Playing a land happens immediately, and an opponent does not have a chance to respond to the land being played. Creature cards are summoned to fight for you. Each creature has a power and toughness value, and can be used to attack your opponent, or to block your opponent from attacking you. Now, when a creature is summoned, it comes under the effect of summoning sickness, and cannot attack or use abilities that require it to tap. A sorcery spell is cast during your main phase. You pay the cost, then resolve the effect that's written on the card, and then it goes to your graveyard. Instant cards work exactly the same as sorceries, except that you can basically cast them whenever you want. So you can use them in response to an opponent's card, or you can just cast it during an opponent's turn. Enchantment cards are permanent magical energies that remain in play and have continuous effects. Some enchantments are also classified as auras, and they are used to modify other permanents that are already in play. Artifacts are similar to enchantments in the sense that they stay on the battlefield and have continuous effects. They are generally colorless, so any color mana can be used to play them. There are also different kinds of artifacts, like equipment cards that can be equipped to modify creatures, and some artifacts are actually creatures themselves. Lastly, you can summon planeswalkers who are powerful allies that can help you in battle. A planeswalker comes into play with a certain amount of loyalty counters, and if that number ever reaches 0, the planeswalker has been defeated and is sent to the graveyard. A planeswalker has several different abilities that cost or gain loyalty and can use 1 per turn. Opponents can choose to attack the planeswalker instead of you in order to defeat this powerful ally. Now that we have a basic idea of what the different card types are, let's now work through how a game is played. Each player begins the game with 20 life, and if that number reaches 0, or if you have no cards left in your library when it is time for you to draw, you lose the game. So here's the basic setup of the game. Each player has a library, or deck of cards, containing 60 cards. A library is generally divided up into 24 land cards and 36 other cards. This zone here is the battlefield. You generally split it up into 2 rows, one row for all of your land cards, and the other one for all your other permanents, like your artifacts or enchantments and your creature cards. And lastly, this area over here is the graveyard, so after you use a card, or if a creature is defeated, it gets sent to the graveyard. At the beginning of the game, randomly determine who will be the first player. Then each player draws 7 cards and places them into their hand. The maximum number of cards you can have in your hand is 7, so if you happen to have more than 7 cards in your hand at the end of your turn, you must discard until you only have 7. A turn of Magic is divided into 5 different phases. The beginning phase, main phase number 1, the combat phase, main phase number 2, and then the end phase. The beginning phase is then divided into 3 steps: the untap step, the upkeep step, and the draw step. So the first step is the untap step. So you start the turn by untapping all of your permanents. So we have 4 mountains here that have been tapped. Last turn we used them to play the Dragon's Claw artifact, as well as the Dragon's Fodder sorcery card, which let us put into play 2 1/1 goblins. So a card becomes tapped when you use it for an ability that requires it to become tapped, or when a creature card attacks. The second step during the beginning phase is the upkeep step. This step is usually ignored unless there is a card that has an ability that happens during the upkeep step. And the last step of the beginning phase is to draw a card from the top of your library. If it is the first player's turn on the first turn, that player does not get to draw, and this helps balance out the advantages to going first. So let's start the turn off by drawing a card. Okay, so now we have another mountain in our hand that we can use for summoning spells this turn. Next up is the main phase. During this phase, you can play any number of cards from your hand that you have mana to pay for. Now remember, once per turn, you can add a land card to the field from your hand. So we have 1 mountain here that we'll add to play, and now we can use that one this turn for generating more mana. And now that we have some mana built up here, let's summon another creature spell. So we have this Dragon Whelp, which costs 4 mana, 2 of any color, but we need to spend at least 2 red. So we'll tap 4 mountains, which gives us the required 4 mana, and we can summon the Dragon Whelp. Now when you summon a creature, or when you cast any spell, it goes on what's called the stack. After a card is placed on the stack, each player has the opportunity to respond to that card by playing an instant or an ability. The cards and abilities on the stack then come off of the stack and are resolved in a last one on, first one off scenario. So think of a stack of plates. The first plate that you put on the stack is the last one to get used, and then the last one that you put on top of the stack is the first one that gets pulled off. So now that the stack has been resolved, the creature card is now considered to be in play. And remember that creatures cannot attack or use an ability that requires them to tap in the turn in which they are played due to summoning sickness. The third phase of a Magic turn is the combat phase, and that is divided up into 5 different steps. The beginning of combat, declaring attackers, declaring blockers, combat damage, and finally the end step of combat. The beginning of combat is a brief phase where each player has the opportunity to cast an instant spell or activate abilities. Next, the attacking player declares which of their creatures will attack. A creature can attack as long as it is untapped and not suffering from summoning sickness. After attackers are declared, each player can play an instant or an ability if they so desire. Now the defending player gets to choose its defenders. Any creature can defend as long as it is not tapped. The next step is combat damage, where each of the attacking creatures apply their power to the toughness of the defending creature, and the defending creature applies its power to the attacking creature's toughness. If a defender chooses 2 or more creatures to block a single attacker, the attacking player chooses the order in which damage is applied to those creatures, but enough damage must be applied to the first creature before any damage can be applied to any subsequent creatures. If an attacking creature is left undefended, the damage is then dealt to the defending player's life total. So let's take a look at how an attack step works. Okay, so us as the attacking player, we have 3 creatures in play. We have 2 goblins, who are both 1/1s, and we have the dragon whelp, who's a 2/3. Now we just played the dragon whelp this turn, so he has summoning sickness and cannot attack. But we choose to attack with both of our goblins. So we turn our goblins 90 degrees to indicate that they are attacking, and this also means that they are tapped, so now we cannot use them to block on our opponent's turn, but at the beginning of our next turn we will be able to untap them and attack again. So our opponent has 2 available creatures to block with. They have a 1/1 creature and a 2/2. So our opponent chooses to block one of our goblins with his 2/2 creature, because then his 2/2 creature will not die and one of our goblins will die. He chooses not to block with his 1/1 because he does not want his creature to die and isn't too worried about the 1 damage that he's going to take from the goblin. So now that blockers have been assigned, we resolve combat damage. So our goblin deals 1 damage to the Leonin Sky Cutter, or Leonin Sky Hunter, and the Leonin Sky Hunter does 2 damage to our goblin. Our goblin only has 1 toughness, so it is now destroyed. The Leonin Sky Hunter has 2 toughness, and it's only taken 1 damage from the goblin, so it still has 1 toughness, so it is not destroyed. Now our opponent takes 1 damage from this goblin because it was not blocked. So now during the end step of combat, we still have 2 mana open that we can use to cast any instant spells. So we're going to use that 2 red mana to use this Punishing Fire, which costs 2 mana and does 2 damage to any creature or player. So we'll make it do 2 damage to the Leonin Sky Hunter, and then thus defeating it and sending it to our opponent's graveyard. So that's the end of combat. And the next phase is Main Phase 2, which works exactly the same as Main Phase 1. So if you have any other mana open to cast any spells, you can do so in this step. And finally, the last phase of a magic turn is the End Phase, which consists of 2 steps, the End Step and the Cleanup Step. The End Step is just there for players to use any remaining abilities and play any instants, as well as resolve any card effects that happen during the End Step. And finally is the Cleanup Step, where if you have more than 7 cards in your hand, you discard down to 7 cards. Also, all damage is removed from creatures during this step. So next up is your opponent's turn, and he will start back at the beginning phase and do everything that you just did. So I hope this gives you a basic understanding of how MTG works. Stay tuned for my next video where Angela and I will be playing a demo game to give you a better understanding of how a full game works from start to finish. I hope you found this video informative, and I hope to see you at the next NCGC meetup. If you like this video, please check us out at ncgc.ca, or you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Twitch. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.